Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Slater Sanchez. I'm one of the principals at Hillview Middle School. And today I'm here to read you a book called What's the Big Deal About Elections? It's by Ruby Shamir and Matt Faulkner. One person, one vote. Picture the scene, bonfires lighting up the town square as parades of brass bands march by. Floats wheeling caged raccoons, bears, and eagles before rowdy crowds. Torches exploding into shooting flames. What was all the excitement about? It was Election Day the way Americans celebrated it about 200 years ago. Kids loved to be part of the action and couldn't wait until they were finally old enough to vote. Life is very different these days, and Election Day looks pretty different too. But one thing remains the same. Americans still vote on Election Day, and when you're 18, you'll be able to vote too. But why does that matter? What are Americans voting for, and why is voting so important? What's the big deal about elections anyway? So what are elections? Elections are a fair way to make decisions as a group. Say your class gets to choose what to play in gym, and 10 kids say kickball, but only 7 say tag. Well, kickball is one for that day. Every kid gets one vote, and the choice with the most votes wins. Now, can you imagine getting to choose your teacher or your soccer coach or your parents? Elections are cool because we vote to choose the people in charge. We elect our leaders to very big jobs like president, governor, or mayor. And that means those people get their power from us, the voters, who give those men and women those important positions. The U.S. Constitution starts with the words, "We the people," because we don't have a ruler who gets to be in charge forever. Instead, we decide together what's important and who's in charge. If they're not doing a good job, we get to choose new leaders in the next election. One very big deal about elections is that we, the people, each get one vote. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, strong or scrawny, tall or short, everyone has an equal say in the voting booth. Our government is elected to represent us. Who gets to vote? Most American citizens who are at least 18 years old can vote where they live, but it wasn't always this way. When the United States was first formed nearly 250 years ago, in most places only white men who owned a home or land were allowed to vote. No women, no African Americans, no Native Americans, no poor people, no one under the age of 21, none of them had a say when the time came to pick leaders and representatives in government. Slowly, over many, many years, different groups of people demanded the right to vote, and they won. Frederick Douglass knew that the right to vote in elections was an important part of American freedom. He demanded the vote for Black Americans who were former slaves because it is our right. He said, without the vote, slavery is not abolished. Native Americans, the first people to live on this continent, were only granted American citizenship in 1924. And even then, it took another 40 years before every state allowed Native Americans to vote. And even though kids like you can't vote, your voices still count. You can join with your friends and neighbors to stand up for what you believe in. When African Americans were denied the chance to participate in elections, children protested for the rights of their parents and grandparents. In doing so, they were marching for their very own futures too. You have to be an American citizen to vote in most elections in this country. Anyone born in America is automatically a citizen. If you weren't born here, you can become a citizen, though it takes some time and effort. We make change on Election Day with our votes, but we can make a difference every day through our actions. So why do we vote? We vote to elect people to lead the government. People who run for office are called candidates. Once candidates win elections, they are called elected officials and they go to work in the government. But what exactly is the government? For one thing, government is a way to organize, plan, and build things that are too big for one person or one family to do alone, especially things that we share, like roads. We all need roads to get to school or to the store or to the playground. But how do we decide where the road should go? Who will hire and pay the workers to pave the road? What about lighting the road so people can use it at night? Who will make sure that everyone drives safely on the road? Because we all share the road, we all should have a say in answering those questions, and we do. Through the people we elect, we get to decide what our government does. And to pay for big projects like roads, the government collects money, taxes, from all of us. One very important goal of voting is to have a say in how our tax money is spent. This was one of the reasons the American Revolution started, to tell the King of England he couldn't tax Americans without representation, without giving them a say in English elections. So why does government matter? We live in a very big country. There are lots of things that happen every day that we don't even think about because the country seems to run on its own, but it doesn't. Government workers include some of the most helpful people in our neighborhoods, like firefighters, police officers, and teachers. And elected officials in our government make decisions that touch our lives every day, not just in how to build roads, schools, and parks, but also how to pay the doctors and nurses who take care of us when we're sick, how to make sure our water is clean enough to drink, and how to keep our medicine and food safe. They make those decisions based on what we, the voters, think is important. Garbage collection keeps the streets clean, waterways fresh, and our bodies healthy by clearing away germs. Before New York City's Department of Sanitation, the world's biggest, was established, the city was so stinky that travelers could smell it from 6 miles away. In 1903, New Yorkers were so grateful for sanitation workers that they were cheered at a parade. Choosing who serves in government is a very big deal. So who do we elect to lead the government? That depends on which government you're talking about. The federal government, which is the one that oversees our whole country, is based in Washington, D.C., and that's where the president and other leaders live. But most elected officials stay right in our own state or even in your city or town. While no two states are run exactly the same, each is led by citizens who are elected by other citizens. Governors and state representatives, mayors and city council members, county commissioners, and even some local judges are elected to make sure everything close to home runs smoothly. School board members are elected to make sure that public schools have healthy lunches, art supplies, sports equipment, caring teachers, and good principals. In many states, judges and sheriffs are elected too. There was even a time when towns would elect dog catchers. So what exactly happens in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C. is our nation's capital, the seat of government for the whole country. All 325 million of us living on almost 4 million square miles. The White House, the president's home and office, is there. We elect the president who works with Congress to govern our nation. Members of Congress are elected from every state, and they gather in Washington, D.C. to make laws that matter for the entire country. The House of Representatives and the Senate, the two chambers of Congress, write bills and pass them after debate. The President of the United States then signs those bills into law and carries them out. The third branch of the federal government is the judiciary, judges, who help settle questions about the law. The president chooses federal judges, and they're approved by the Senate. So while we don't directly elect those judges, they're selected and approved by people we elect. Different laws can be made for different cities and states, but the laws passed in Washington, D.C. are about things that need to be the same all over the country. Like what? Well, from New York to New Mexico, we all need to have fresh water to drink. And from Colorado to Connecticut, we need clean air too. Whether you're in North Dakota or North Carolina, you should be able to use the same money. Congress also makes laws about when to go to war, how to make peace with other countries, and how to pay for everything by raising taxes. How do we elect our leaders? It's usually pretty simple. We vote for the person we support, and the candidate with the most votes wins. This is how we elect pretty much all of our leaders. But presidential elections are different because we elect presidents through something called the Electoral College. The Electoral College has nothing to do with the school you might go to after high school. Instead, it's a group of people from each state called electors. When we vote for the president, we're actually voting for electors in our state, who will then turn around and vote for the president. In most states, all of the electors of the state vote for the person who won the most votes in the state. The number of electors is the number of House of Representative members plus the number of senators plus 3 for Washington, D.C. States with more people have more electors in the Electoral College. How do we know who to choose in an election? It can be a tough choice. One way to choose is to listen to what candidates say they'll do and then make sure that they keep their promises after Election Day. We can do this by watching their debates, listening to their speeches, visiting their websites, and writing to them. If they don't keep their promises or do a good job, we can vote them out in the next election. Another way is to learn what political party they're in. Sorry to say, political parties aren't anything like birthday parties. No cake, no candles, no gifts. Political parties are groups that people join because they agree on how the government should be run. And like when rooting for sports teams, people can get very excited about them. In our country, we have 2 main political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. How can such a big country with so many people have only 2 choices? We actually do have a lot of smaller parties, but most voters choose candidates from one of the 2 big parties when they go to vote. But the most important way to make a decision about who to vote for is to use your head and ask lots of questions. What should the government be doing that it isn't doing now? In Congress, passing good laws? How can the candidates who are running for office make a difference? Even if the person you choose doesn't win, it's still important to vote because it sends a message to the winner and others about what matters to you. So who can run for an office? Anyone who is a citizen and old enough can run for office. Different positions have different requirements about how long you have to have been a citizen and where you need to live. But that's pretty much it for the rules. To be president, you need to be at least 35 years old and be a natural-born U.S. citizen. For the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old, and for the House of Representatives, you need to be at least 25. For both the state and the House of Representatives, you need to have been an American citizen for a while and live in the place you want to represent. The presidency has attracted a wide range of candidates over the years. Belva Ann Lockwood ran for president nearly 40 years before women had the right to vote. Margaret Chase Smith was the first woman to be seriously considered for the presidency from one of the major political parties. Barack Obama was the first Black American to win the president, but he wasn't the first African American to run. Jesse Jackson ran in 1988, and before that, in 1972, Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to run for president. Her campaign slogan said she was unbought and unbossed, and she worked hard to provide children with healthy food and doctors when they were sick. No matter your hairstyle, taste in food, fashion sense, favorite sport, or current job, you can be a candidate. Astronauts, actors, accountants, and more have all run for office. So how do candidates get elected? Running for office takes a lot of time and effort. Candidates meet as many voters as possible, listen to what's important to us, and talk about how they will stand up for us if they get elected. They meet voters at local festivals, hold large meetings, debate other candidates, and appear in the news. One popular stop for presidential candidates is the Iowa State Fair, where almost any food you can imagine comes plopped on a stick. Peanut butter and jelly, brownies, pork chops, salad, and even deep fried butter. But to do all of this, candidates need help, and that's where you come in. Even as a kid, you can volunteer on a campaign and convince others to vote for your favorite candidate by making phone calls, knocking on your neighbors' doors, hanging up posters, handing out leaflets and campaign buttons, raising money, and speaking out about what you believe. So how do we vote? Every year on Election Day, citizens go to their polling places to vote, though every state has different rules for how it's done. Some places have voting machines where you touch a computer screen to record your vote, and in other states, you fill out a paper ballot that gets fed into a counting machine. These technologies are supposed to make voting quick, easy to count, and hard to cheat at. No new technology has been perfect, but we keep trying to come up with ways to make voting easier and more secure. Before you can vote, though, you need to sign up or register to vote. This is another way you can get involved even before you're old enough to vote yourself, by encouraging all the grown-ups you know to register to vote so that they can be ready to cast their ballots on Election Day. Even though we still have one election day in November, a lot of states offer other ways to vote. People can vote by mail and people can vote early, in some places a full month leading up to Election Day. If you're away from home on Election Day, you can send in an absentee ballot. People serving overseas in the military can vote from where they're stationed. Even astronauts can vote from space. So what happens after elections? When candidates lose elections, they usually go home to their families and go on with their lives, though sometimes they choose to run for office again in the future. The winners, though, get to serve their term or terms in government. When that term is up or they lose an election, an elected official willingly leaves office and hands his or her position over to the next person elected to that role. This is called the peaceful transfer of power, and strange as it sounds, it's really a big deal. Election losers and elected officials whose terms have ended don't start wars to take over the government, and they don't stay put and refuse to leave. They listen to the choice the voters made and move on, leaving the office to the next guy or gal who has been chosen by the will of the people. The peaceful transfer of power shows that the real power isn't in the office or the elected official, but in us, the voters. And that's why it's important to vote on Election Day, and also to stay active all year long, paying attention to what our leaders do and say, because in the end, we're in charge. The end. Thanks for listening.